again and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. I've been so privileged with 366 previous programs in which a group of men, women, children come and discuss something that we find important from an interfaith perspective. Well, sure enough, we've never done this topic ever, and why, I can't tell you. But there was an essay in the Fresno Bee on November 1st called "Laughter is Liberating, but it Carries Some Risk." And I thought, why don't we bring in the author of that essay and some reverends in town who could discuss it and look at the importance of humor in religion, but also perhaps even a bit of irreverence, a bit of sarcasm, a bit of wit, a bit of cynicism, a bit of charm, but also maybe having an edge to it. And is that appropriate? Is that right? Or is religion meant to be straight and cut and dried, and don't joke around with it, Jim, it's too sacred? Well, let's talk to these people about this today. Andy is our professor from California State University, the director of the Center for Ethics, a fantastic program up at that university. In fact, one of the best things up there. Thank you, Andy. Father David Norris is one of the best things in town. That would be our parish of the St. Paul Newman Center, where Father is our sacramental priest. He also is the director of chaplaincy here for the Diocese of Fresno and many other sundry affairs that he directs. Across from me is a good friend and the pastor of the Big Red Church, First Congregational Church of Fresno, Reverend Dr. Norman Broadbent. We have 3 doctors here today. I wonder if the first doctor could start off and give us a summary, Andrew, of that essay of yours. Laughter is liberating, but it carries some risk.
Thanks, Jim. It sounds like the setup for a joke to have
It
a philosopher, a priest, and a pastor on. When I wrote that essay, I'd seen the Book of Mormon, the musical, and I laughed hysterically through the whole musical. I normally don't go to musical theater, but I was invited to go to the show, and I found it to be incredibly funny, but it's horribly offensive too. So, I'm an ethicist and a philosopher, and I worry about people's feelings. And so as I'm sitting there laughing and giggling, I'm looking around the audience, and I notice everyone else just, laughing hysterically at some really horrible things, like making fun of Mormons, for one, making fun of religion, for 2, sexual, scatological humor, making fun of ignorant Africans, making fun of child rape, making fun of AIDS, and so on and so forth. Now, that's made by the creators of South Park.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So it's funny but offensive. So anyway, I got to thinking about, are there some things we shouldn't laugh at, including especially religion? And so I dug back into my own, where I come from, which is Plato and the Greek philosophers. And Plato at one point says that about religion you shouldn't joke at all. About serious things, you need to be serious, and religion is serious. And in part, he's responding to the Greeks who made fun of religion too. And some of the Greek stories of religion show the gods having sex and raping maidens and getting drunk and carrying on. And Plato suggests that you shouldn't go there with religion. So anyway, I was reflecting on that. My thesis, my conclusion is that one of the beautiful things is that we live in a free country. And the meaning of freedom is that we can make fun of other people. It may be mean, it may be cruel, but we do. And we're pretty good at it, by the way. And our pop culture is very good at making fun of all kinds of things, including religion. On the other hand, I would rather live here than anywhere else, because there are some parts of the world where making fun of religion will get you killed. So it's a wonderful thing that we have the freedom to mock each other. But the risk is that it makes us callous and cruel and indifferent and mean.
It was a great essay, and you summarized it, as they say, pretty well since you wrote it. So, excellent. Thank you, Doctor. Father David, opening thought. It doesn't have to, build on Andy, but where would you like to make an opening thought?
Well, humor is very subjective. Something that I find hilariously funny, someone else may think, what does that mean, or what is that? And I don't know how many times I've had it happen where I'd say something, and I try to bring humor into homilies and into preaching on a regular basis, but sometimes people don't get the joke, And there's a large portion of people, and I'd love to think that my sense of humor is perfect and is how could anybody even have any problem with it? But it depends on what your own experience is. Like so many things in life, what you speak out of is basically your own experience. And things that you find funny, someone else might find offensive. And I've had that happen as well and had to apologize. I'm sorry you took offense. I didn't mean it in an offensive way. But as Dr. Fiala said, it can be at the same time funny and offensive depending on the audience. And then there's a general group of people, and we may get to talk a little bit about that. As you mentioned, it's somewhat cultural, Andy, but it's the world's largest minority, I like to call them, the humor impaired. There are some people who just do not find anything funny, and they seem to have a life that's very, very rigidly controlled. And would not find anything. But I always look at myself when I'm saying something and see, well, is that going to be really offensive to someone, and particularly in the place of worship and in a place where people are trying to communicate with spiritual aspects of life. So those are just a few beginning thoughts on it.
Great opening thought. Norman.
Well, I had an opportunity to read the article when it first came out, and had a great appreciation for some of your insights. And one of the things that captured my imagination in reading the original article and talking about how we offend people, I was thinking of context as a person who deals with language and theology in context. One of the first thoughts that came to mind was, remember it was somewhere in the last year, Jay Leno got into a lot of trouble because he made a joke about being from Fresno. And it reminded me of a passage that occurs in the Gospel of John in the first chapter, Philip and Nathaniel. And they're having this conversation about following Jesus, and Nathaniel says, well, does anything good ever come out of Nazareth? I mean, substitute Fresno. And what you do is you get a cultural context of a sense of humor that was part of the language and the environment of Jesus' own time. And one of the things that has long fascinated me has been the role of humor within, particularly the Christian context. Was it years ago that Elton Trueblood came out with the book, The Humor of Christ, which really opened the door for the conversation about the fact that the scriptures, particularly the Gospels, are laden with these ironic stories. And Amy Jo Levine has talked about the parables being a form of humor, ironic humor, in which the setup is even funnier to the original hearer than necessarily the punchline. And so in looking at the context in which humor occurs, I thought that you nailed it when you gave us that image, that there is the humor that can heal, but there's the laughter that can cut. And I thought that was a very, very important insight for us to maybe think about some more in this conversation here.
Exactly. Normally we have a litany of questions. I have all these Q, and they have to give me the A's. Instead, today, I'm just wondering if anyone, now that you've all made your opening thoughts, you'd like to further clarify what you opened with, or jump onto what someone shared, or start a whole new train. Andy.
Well, Norman points out that there's the context and the intention, too, which you can use humor to teach and to uplift and to motivate. You know, a coach will do this, a pastor will do this, a professor will do this, a teacher, a father will do this. You can also use humor to put down, belittle, denigrate, ridicule, mock, and so on. And you know, one of the things I'm really worried about with that Book of Mormon, and it's a bunch of other things like South Park and The Simpsons and other popular cultures, we tend to do more of the negative kind of humor than the positive, if you like that distinction. That we like to put each other down. We're actually pretty good at that, and we're not so good at the uplifting kind of humor, or at least our popular culture doesn't reflect that more positive side of it. So I'm worried that we're kind of spiraling downwards in a kind of negativity. Even Jay Leno sometimes.
You said one thing that made me look at Father David for not a rebuttal, but to pick up on a word, because it deserves to be spoken about at this program, because religion does get commented upon, mentioned, and developed over and over, year after year, on The Simpsons. Father David did his doctoral work on the theology of The Simpsons. Father David, speak to this. I always stretch the truth. Father is a doctor, but that wasn't his thesis. Father David, clarify your use of The Simpsons, which fits in often liturgically very nicely.
Well, I often use the image of Homer, because some people say that I bear a resemblance to Homer Simpson. Certainly my hairstyle is very close to that. But if you read subtly, and I've seen actually books of the philosophy of The Simpsons or the gospel according to The Simpsons, which pick up the themes that Matt Groening uses throughout those programs. And actually, if you followed The Simpsons closely, Homer, on one occasion or another, actually interviews God and talks with God. God directly comes into his living room, literally takes the roof off his house and steps in, and they have quite a conversation. And because I think there's an underlying current of belief, even in a cartoon. There are values. Obviously, every form of media has values implied or explicit in it, and in that, I think they treat religion seriously. They take the existence of a deity, of the divine, and the separation of humanity and the divine. And in many ways, there's no one more separate from the transcendent than Homer Simpson. So if God is going to intervene, that's a good place to start. Like many of us, too, probably would say the same thing about ourselves, that we need that. But yeah, I think a lot has to do with, as has been mentioned, with the intention of the humor, if it's meant to degrade or if it's meant to mock. But I've always found a subtle stream in The Simpsons and in other religious satire that it's not mocking for the sake of degrading so much as it's mocking to help people to think. To help people, as Andy said when you're teaching a class, to help people to say, well, if you see something differently or you would like, what would you say to contradict this? How would you respond to that if you feel you're being attacked?
That strikes another point for me in terms of the intent, the distinction between mocking and self-deprecation. I find really useful an examination of Jewish humor. Which is largely self-deprecating. As Jim knows, I spent quite a bit of time in Russia. And one of the great surprises to me in visiting there was discovering this level of deep humor, this cultural humor. One example is during the Soviet period. Particularly among Russian Jews, there began a whole cycle of jokes and stories called Rabinovich cycle. And one of the very simple example is a census taker comes, knocks on the door. Abram Rabinovich opens the door and says, does Abram Rabinovich live here? No, he does not. Oh, well, who are you? Abram Rabinovich. Well, I thought you said Abram Rabinovich doesn't live here. And he says, you call this living?
Oh.
I mean, that's a very typical kind of joke that came through the Soviet period, but this is we've seen played out, particularly within American Jewish comedic traditions, this ability at self-deprecation, which is very, very different than the mocking, derisive kind of humor that we sometimes pick up in modern day culture.
Well, this is the difference with that Book of Mormon. If the Mormons, if the authors of the Book of Mormon, the musical, were Mormons, it would have a whole different meaning than it does that it's someone from outside the religion looking in on it. And I mean, it's really interesting that yeah, sure, of course we're allowed to make fun of ourselves, but there's something else that happens when we direct it outwards at other people.
They told me with this signal, unfortunately, that we have to take our break. So we'll be back in a minute, but stay tuned because we have still half a program to share with you, and that means a lot of humor and a lot of insight into the power, the liberating power of laughter. Stay tuned.
KNXT TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and planned giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Hello again, and welcome to the second part of this program on Laughter is Liberating, but it carries some risk. You'll notice that we gave Norman, who gave a great presentation, a chance to be replaced by another reverend, and we're going to meet him right now. Sitting across from me is Reverend Dr. Chris Breedlove. the pastor of College Community Congregational Church. It's the first time that Pastor Chris has been on the program, so you may want to tell us, Chris, what you enjoyed in the first half of the program, or what was it that you knew you did want to share about this, because you did sign up to be on the program right away saying, I have a feeling for this topic. Why?
Well, thank you for having me on the program. It's so nice to share this conversation with others. And Andy, thank you for starting the ball rolling on this particular conversation for us. There's something very attractive about humor, and David was mentioning using it in homilies, and I certainly do that with sermons. And something too I notice just in the secular world. We have this conversation about, is it appropriate in sacred quarters, or is it more common or more free and secular quarters? This interesting observation in secular quarters that humor is very attractive and can be a very powerful tool to illuminate a very contentious topic, or a very controversial topic, or a very serious topic. So if I turn on the CNN and Hardball is going, and here are these very polemic and partisan personalities just ranting and raving and going after each other, nobody hears each other. Or if I go to Comedy Central with The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, he can take on a very serious topic and use wit and humor to scrutinize an important issue that needs to be scrutinized, and players in that issue. And so, yeah, it's blurred. When is it mocking? When is it scrutinizing? When is it demonizing somebody or a party or a group of people? And when is it taking a topic serious? So I find that humor can be a tool that can be used well or poorly.
I'll just say one thing after that is we see instead, Peggy and I, we see Stephen Colbert every night religiously for the humor and also for the insight. Also, believe it or not, his Catholic faith. It comes up so directly and indirectly with all the guests. He plays with his, but I'm a Catholic and I believe this. And it's awesome to see how he plays off his own faith, especially his friendship with James Martin, the Jesuit priest who wrote a fantastic book recently on the humor of Christ. And also, as Norman had said, people have written about Jesus as a very enlightened, clever, funny guy. Where do we go from there?
Well, this idea that humor is useful as criticism, which I think you were pointing at, it's true, right? You laugh at things because you're critical. You have a sort of outside edge on it. The problem is, I'm worried, is that humor is such a blunt instrument of criticism that it doesn't hone in on, well, what is it exactly about the Mormons or the Catholics or the Jews or whoever? What is it about these different people, different faiths that bothers me? It's sort of just this, overarching umbrella mockery, and we laugh at them without even really knowing the details of what it is about their faith that bothers us, or the specifics of, well, what is it about this thing, this and the other that gets under my skin? Instead, we laugh, and then when we laugh, we're not thinking anymore. It's sort of like, now I throw up my hands, and I find it to be hilarious, and then I can go to bed. Colbert's over, or whatever. But I don't have to think anymore. Like sort of the laughter just liberates us from the real criticism, which is wonderful, but also dangerous, because we laugh ourselves to sleep at night instead of really thinking critically about, what's wrong with the world. So, pros and cons.
Yeah, and when Norman was up here, he mentioned that the Jewish humor during the oppressive regime in Russia, and I think that is often another use of humor, is that it helps people to get through pain. It helps people to get through suffering. Much of the comedy that comes out of the Jewish community has to do with that, and I think the great comedian who's now passed on, Rodney Dangerfield, he used, and just looking at his own autobiography, he used a lot of his suffering, a lot of the pain in his own life, and he brought it out in humor. And I think that that's true in one way or another of many people, whether they do it consciously or not. It's used to diffuse stressful situations, or it's used to help them overcome or just get through the day. I often say when I was in the seminary, I was a great fan of Jonathan Winters and loved his humor, and I say that certainly helped to keep me sane, during the seminary, that's a whole other line, is the crossing over the line between sanity and insanity, which Jonathan Winters has done on a couple of occasions. But I think humor can get us through stressful situations, especially if it's self-deprecating, especially because it gives us a sense of perspective about what is serious and what is true and what is real and what is really not so serious and what is not so important. It can help us to maybe puncture some of those inflated ideas, as satirists do, and as people like Stephen Colbert do. They puncture pomposity, and the Feast of Fools, and the tradition was meant to exactly do that, turn society on its head and make take a little satirical look at all of the things that some people tend to take maybe too seriously at times.
Are there some things that we should take seriously without making fun of them, though, or is everything up for laughter? Can we mock
that's
everything?
always the comedian's question. Is it too soon to poke fun at this?
Yep.
Is it too soon to joke about 9/11? Is it ever appropriate to joke about 9/11 or the tsunami or horrible things like that? Timing, comedic timing. And there's a question there. When is it appropriate? When do you do this, if ever?
Yeah, you mentioned the recent television program, some weeks ago, about the Golden Globe Awards and some of the comedy that was used, and the hosts this year, whom I love, Amy Poehler and Tina Fey, had replaced another host who had maybe crossed the line, and they said, well, he's not going to be here, so we are not going to follow down that path of offending anyone. And then, of course, they immediately poked fun at certain individuals in the audience. But hopefully, if people get the humor, or if people are expecting it in that environment, as Don Rickles used to say, if people were offended at his comedy act, well, you weren't coming to see Billy Graham. Why are you offended? If you were expecting something else, then you don't come to see, the person you're coming to see. So I think a lot of it is, I say, subjective, but a lot of it in context. You sometimes know what you're getting, and then you shouldn't be surprised if you get your chain yanked a little bit.
Andy did put a question on the table, and I don't know if either of you do want to make a stab at it, or else I will. Are there some things that are just, they're off the table? They are, I think that was more the point of, never mind the timing. I mean, that's one way to say we got to wait on that one. But are there some things too sacred, too holy, too important, too sacred, too special to ever play with? I mean, are there any? Or is it all fair game?
Well, one thing that leaps to my mind immediately is that someone who is in genuine pain or suffering is never to be made the brunt of humor, or to be made, to be mocked, or to be made fun of, or somebody who is sincerely exposing, certain vulnerabilities about their life. And sometimes that's done in the media.
Yeah.
I can name a number of examples of it in just recent history, that certain commentaries were made about individuals that were at least insensitive. The human person is sacred, and anything that would defile pain or suffering, or violate the human person in a direct way, or even an indirect way, by making light of suffering, I think that would cross the line. That would, there's nothing funny down that road, as there was a song by some comedian some years ago, and they made a whole list of topics that they said, those are off bounds. There's nothing funny down that road, so don't go there.
If you don't mind if I add that, as it came up earlier too, that the context seems to matter. That someone who is suffering, we could laugh in solidarity with them in their suffering, and the self-deprecating humor, and then we laugh along because we're sort of there with them. Mm-hmm. The same laugh, it sounds the same, but you can use that to put the other person down as well. So the context seems to matter a whole lot there.
There's such a subtle sensitivity to it too, that gun violence has happened. It's been rampant in our recent history and throughout our history. I would never feel comfortable listening to humor at the expense of people who have suffered so deeply and will never recover from that moment, in a sense, who have lost loved ones. But at the same time, you see the comedians out there, whatever the nightly shows are, might poke fun at the NRA, at the NRA's expense, or might poke fun at Congress that's struggling to deal with this or not dealing with this. And so you see the subtle play that the issue that brings so many tears to people's face, that certainly should be sacred. But then it's the line sometimes is blurred. Well, how close can you get to that point that you don't touch? And I think that's an interesting conversation as well.
They're signaling we have about 2 minutes. So this is the 2-minute drill. We do it on the football field. We do it here too. We set up our last plays. Andy, to make sure any point you know you did want to make, this is your chance.
Well, thanks again for having me on. And I
welcome.
think that the one thing that is wonderful about the United States and where we live and our culture is that we're free to mock each other. It's dangerous because the mockery can be mean and biting. But I'd much rather be in a free society where the comedians are free to do what they want and say what they want than to live in another sort of place where that's off limits. So I'm glad we're here able to talk about this stuff.
Before Father David and Chris make their last comment, I want to say that all of these programs that you're watching on Channel 49, the locally produced, are on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We'd like you to go visit. This program will be there for you to see again and to tell your friends who live in other parts of the country. They could watch this program anytime on KNXT.TV. It's where we have our YouTube channel. Father David, final thought.
Well, every once in a while I have a picture in my office which I brought with me today, and it shows the laughing Christ, and I was told that it's probably not going to show up too well on the television screen, but it never fails. It was in a magazine a number of years ago, and it's Jesus having a hearty laugh, and I never fail to have someone walk in the office for an appointment and they say, "Oh, I never saw a picture before of Jesus laughing," or I never thought of Jesus laughing. And I just would leave that thought, if not, why not? Why if he was human in all things, but sin, as the scripture says, why wouldn't he have had a great sense of humor? Why wouldn't he have shared a good laugh with people? And if we think that religion is too serious in total to never have any humor in it, then I think that'd be a good point to start a discussion questioning, well, why not? Why wouldn't religion have that aspect to it?
I have to do the last word. I'm sorry, Chris. I really enjoyed this panel today. It was great having people come and share the power of humor, the risk of humor, and the importance of using it in a correct, good, productive way. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and you'll join us again next week. God bless.